All right, everyone. Welcome to this second second episode of our VAMP, Vanderbilt Modern Philosophy Spring Seminar 2024. This is our fourth edition, so very proud that we've kept this going. We're very happy to have today Francesco Cataldi. He will be delivering a presentation on a figure that's not as often talked about as some of the big names in modern philosophy, but we'll hear today that that's not accurate or justified. So we'll be hearing about Gershom Carmichael and the metaphysical foundations of right. So please join me in welcoming Francesco and take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It depends on the part of the world you are in. Okay, I'll start by sharing the screen. Okay. Can you see the presentation? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All good.
Okay, and because I cannot see you, so my name is Francesco Cataldi. I am a postgraduate student from the University of Catania. Today I will be presenting a talk entitled Political Theology on the Verge of the Scottish Enlightenment, Gershom Carmichael and the Metaphysical Foundation of Rights, which I hope will shed light on an overlooked figure in the history of early modern political and legal philosophy. As you can see, this is the table illustrating the contents. First, I'll introduce Gershom Carmichael's thought, a very brief introduction. Then I'll proceed to illustrate the relationship between natural jurisprudence, moral philosophy, and theology, then the interconnection between reason, nature, and God's will. Then the interconnection between virtue, ethics, natural law, and soul's immortality. Then the metaphysical foundation of duties and rights, the human nature and his political anthropology, and the right of resistance. Okay, let's start. Gershom Carmichael, 1672-1729, a Scottish philosopher and professor of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, the first to hold the chair later occupied by Francis Hutcheson and Adam Smith, is a prominent figure bridging the gap between the pre-Enlightenment and the Enlightenment in Scotland. Carmichael introduced Pufendorf's natural law theory in his teachings, drawing from his commentary on the German lawyers on the duty of man and citizen. Carmichael also crafted a metaphysics that harmonized Thomistic principles with the then emerging empirical framework of Newtonian science in his Synopsis of Natural Theology. Despite Carmichael's significance, his thought remains largely understudied. This presentation aims at partially filling this void by elucidating some of the key aspects of his moral and political philosophy, intertwined with his natural jurisprudence and theological perspective. As we will see, by emphasizing what could be termed a system, Carmichael seeks to equate moral philosophy with natural jurisprudence, considering both as the practical part of theology. This interconnection is crucial in order to comprehend his metaphysical foundation of rights. The initial part of the presentation is meant to illustrate such a junction, comparing Carmichael and Pufendorf's conceptions of duty, officium in Latin, and natural law by highlighting the Stoic nuances of the former and revealing the interconnectedness of nature, God's will, and reason. Furthermore, it delves into the argument for the soul's immortality by examining the link between virtue and happiness, as similarly embraced by Kant, grounded on natural law. In the following section, I illustrate how Carmichael's conception of natural rights is rooted in this connection and in his understanding of human nature, deeply social, which will be a very important topic for the later emerging Scottish Enlightenment. This political anthropology, deeply social, means to contrast both Hobbesian views and Pufendorf's, unveiling one of the most significant aspects of his thought, of Carmichael's thought, I mean, the right of resistance. I also shows how Carmichael's legal and moral political philosophy rests upon the assumption of theological voluntarism. In his seminal work, The Scottish Philosophy, biographical, expository, critical, from Acheson to Hamilton, James McCosh, a distinguished academic from Princeton University of the 19th century, identifies Gershom Carmichael's philosophy as pivotal in bridging the gap between traditional and modern philosophical thought in Scotland. McCosh characterizes Carmichael's philosophy as the bond which connects the old philosophy with the new in Scotland. McCosh's intuition is not far from true. One of the most important historical and theoretical features of Carmichael's philosophy, indeed, is the progressive unveiling of the role of reason, lumen naturale, in the foundation of moral philosophy and natural law, lex naturalis. This philosophical journey represents a transition from the old philosophical atmosphere in Scotland, based on revealed theology and the law derived from the sacred books only. Though Carmichael's thought is initially influenced by Cartesianism, his mature philosophical positions are influenced by empiricism, drawing inspiration from the ideas of Locke and Newton. Carmichael's intellectual heritage is rich and diverse, encompassing influences from scholasticism, including the works of Aquinas and Suarez, as well as Stoicism, Newtonianism, and Aristotelian ethics. Notably, Carmichael's philosophy harmonizes natural theology and revealed theology, emphasizing their coherence rather than contradiction, thereby showcasing the depth of his philosophical insights, as well as the importance of his intellectual contribution. Carmichael's philosophical framework can be termed a system, as the whole of his speculation, both practical and theoretical, is intertwined. First, let's consider Carmichael's identity between moral philosophy and natural jurisprudence, which unveils a deep interconnection between these disciplines. Despite apparent differences, Carmichael contends that both moral philosophy and natural jurisprudence are fundamentally concerned with the same subject matter, ethics and the law of nature. Carmichael asserts that while natural jurisprudence may appear distinct from the ethics traditionally taught in academic settings, it essentially serves the same purpose, albeit with greater precision and clarity. This perspective underscores Carmichael's recognition of the inherent unity between moral philosophy and natural jurisprudence, despite their superficial disparities. Furthermore, Carmichael extends this analysis to encompass natural theology within this philosophical framework. He not only departs from the standard view of the time, which sought to celebrate revealed theology, but also challenges the prevailing notion of natural theology as solely theoretical, advocating for a solution that would encompass both theoretical doctrine and practical obedience to divine commands. By emphasizing the inseparable connection between moral doctrine and natural theology, Carmichael's perspective offers valuable insights into the interdisciplinary nature of philosophical inquiry in this phase of the Scottish intellectual history. This is evident on another level. In further accentuating this interconnectedness, Carmichael closes his synopsis with symbolic emphasis, asserting that practical philosophy begins where the theoretical philosophy of God ends. This statement underscores another level of interdependence that complements the existing relationship between moral philosophy and natural jurisprudence. It's important to note that by delineating the latter as the practical components, natural jurisprudence and moral philosophy, Carmichael emphasizes that a proper comprehension of God necessitates a solid understanding of natural law, as well as the duties, officia in Latin, and rights, iura, of individuals. This perspective further underscores the profound implication of philosophical inquiry into the nature of divinity and its intersection with human ethics. Carmichael's exploration of reason as a divine gift further enriches our understanding of his conception of legal and political philosophy. In emphasizing the correct utilization of reason, Carmichael highlights the compatibility between human rationality and natural knowledge. He asserts that our innate human weakness necessitates all the assistance provided by God to discern and adhere to truth, even reason. Moreover, Carmichael posits that the conformity between the understanding, which is derived from natural knowledge, and that presented in Sacred Book, and the one presented in the Sacred Book, serves as a compelling argument for their divine origin and authority. Carmichael says that this conformity can never be appreciated by those who neglect the study of moral science or confuse it with revealed theology, a very common prejudice during Carmichael's times. Importantly, Carmichael dispels the notion of a dichotomy between natural knowledge and revelation, asserting that the use of natural knowledge is not precluded, but rather enhanced by the insights provided in Sacred Book. This is also because reason during Carmichael's time was seen as something that could be potentially dangerous, because a lot of philosophers, such as Hobbes, gave a very strong emphasis on reason. So this was a kind of prejudice. So Carmichael aptly characterizes reason as the highest prerogative of human nature, emphasizing its pivotal role in shaping our understanding of the world and our place within it. In summary, Carmichael's elucidation underscores the harmonious relationship between reason and natural knowledge, offering valuable insights into the integration of human nature, natural law, ethics, and the theological doctrine. There is also an inherent connection between natural law, lex naturalis, and divine law, lex divina, rooted in human rationality and the capacity for moral discernment. It suggests this unity, that through rational reflection and observation, individuals can derive moral truth from the natural order, leading to a convergence between natural and divine law. Additionally, it equates the discipline of understanding and applying natural law with ethics or moral philosophy, emphasizing their inseparable connection. The same God has allowed us a rational faculty by whose right use we may have the power to reflect on the things presented to us and from observation of them and continual comparison of one with another to deduce true and certain conclusions about the morality of our actions and thus of their moral effects, it is clear that the natural law is the true and divine law in the proper sense. This is a very important point for this presentation and for we are going to see. The discipline which teaches the prescriptions of the natural law in themselves, which elicits them from nature herself and demonstrates them, or, and this comes to the same thing, which directs human actions in conformity with that law, is that very discipline which is called ethics or moral philosophy. And therefore, we find no reason to distinguish it from natural jurisprudence. So to summarize, Carmichael means to highlight the intrinsic relationship between human reason, moral principles derived from nature, and divine guidance. According to Carmichael, there is a perfect identity between God's substance and his attributes. The hypothetical distinction between his will and his substance is merely epistemic, a parte hominis, stemming from the imperfection of the subject's intellect as it seeks to understand God's nature, rather than being an ontological distinction. This conception particularly reflects Carmichael's understanding of divine will, voluntas. Will, according to Carmichael, is a perfection, and thinking of a God lacking it would be absurd. Additionally, God's will is the source of everything, including natural law. We experience in ourselves, writes Carmichael, that we will what seems compatible with ourselves and that we reject what seems incompatible with ourselves. Since this in itself shows no imperfection, but on the contrary, obvious perfection, it is certain that will is to be attributed to God. The divine will is utterly independent and cannot be moved or swayed, properly speaking, by external objects, since it is in reality the same as the divine essence and therefore is prior to all external things and eternal and immutable. The conclusion of the argument is that the will of God is the true cause of all existence, of all real existence outside of God, since it completely depends on God and on willing it. This conception is consistent with the reformed theological framework, which asserts that nothing, not even the natural law, can be considered beyond God's will, as highlighted by Bavinck. Additionally, it must be highlighted that the identity between God and his will is not entailed by Pufendorf's metaphysical view. If natural law rested on divine will, according to Pufendorf, it will no longer be immutable, since only God is eternal. This point has been well studied by Norberto Bobbio and Buckle. These observations are coherent with Samuel Gregg's view and expands upon it, a notable aspect of Carmichael's perspective not only on rights, which is Samuel Gregg's view, but also on the law of nature, is its foundation in his criticism of Pufendorf, even on a metaphysical level. I mean to highlight that Samuel Gregg says that it is important to note how Carmichael's theory of rights proceeds from his criticism towards Pufendorf, but his criticism opens other new ways, such as the ones that I am underlining here. In Carmichael's understanding of natural laws, three fundamental principles emerge. The veneration of God, which is the first law of nature, self-respect, which is the second law of nature, and respect for others or promoting sociability, which is the third law of nature. These laws are seen as reflecting God's will, and adhering to them is deemed as a manifestation of reason properly understood and correctly employed. According to Carmichael, God's will is inherently tied to the fulfillment of human capacity and nature. This fulfillment takes the form of virtue, which aligns with happiness and the realization of our duties, and the respect for rights. Comparing Carmichael's perspective with that of Pufendorf reveals a significant difference in their respective political theological frameworks. While Pufendorf identifies sociability as the primary law of nature, Carmichael prioritizes the veneration of God. Such a distinction is fundamental, as we will see. It serves as a point of departure for their divergent political views regarding the legitimacy of the right of resistance. Also, this distinction arises from Carmichael's belief that natural law and divine law are inseparable, a perspective which is not shared by Pufendorf. Indeed, Pufendorf's reluctance to read the study of natural law within a broad theological framework underscores the nuanced variation in theological interpretations within philosophical discourse. Based on these connections, according to Carmichael, the rationality of ethics and natural jurisprudence guides human actions to follow the natural law, which is the same as the divine law, which is the foundation of human duties. I have everywhere related the morality of actions, writes Carmichael, to the divine law alone, since by itself it obliges, and every obligation of human laws is ultimately to be resolved into it. We cannot have a properly clear and distinct idea of moral rightness unless we refer it ultimately to the divine law. This is why we determined to establish the notion of divine law as the sufficient norm and measure of all morality. Moreover, both rationality and the law of nature entails happiness, beatitudo, the main hand of human action and product of God's will. Man is also endowed with the faculty of reasoning, facultas ratiocinandi, which, when he employs it correctly, allows him to understand that he was created not by himself for himself alone, that he and all he has derives from God, who is alone all that is both great and good. And since God has created all things and disposes them with supreme justice and wisdom for the manifestation of his glory, he must govern the human race to the same end, in a manner suitable to its nature. Such a conformity to nature, according to Carmichael, is nothing but happiness that arises from acting virtuously and rationally. Therefore, it follows that, based on this, man should focus all efforts on using their rational mind wisely to seek happiness. This pursuit involves seeking knowledge and embracing what is true and good. The emphasis placed by Carmichael on the naturalness of happiness sharply contrasts with the view of other philosophers of his time, especially Thomas Hobbes, whose ideas were strongly criticized by Carmichael and later by the Scottish Enlightenment in its entirety. I highlight this point because Carmichael's critique of Hobbesian theory hasn't received much attention, though is pivotal for the later historical evolution of the philosophy of the Scottish Enlightenment. Excuse me for this repetition. According to Hobbes, happiness had no anthropological significance and was only conceivable within a conventionalist and materialist framework. Starting from the premise that life is itself but motion and therefore incompatible with any attempt to reach a static state of happiness, Hobbes' theoretical assumption relegate happiness to a mere continual progress of desire from one object to another. Such an understanding of happiness is diametrically opposed to the Aristotelian and Stoic approach adopted by Carmichael. Hobbes not only argues that happiness is repugnant to government, but also claims that its conception as the utmost aim or greatest good is actually foreign to its real instrumental function, which aims at achieving unity and peace for the political community. Happiness or beatitudo, on the contrary, is so significant for Carmichael's legal and political philosophy and metaphysics that at least 3 of his philosophical works, the 2 philosophical theses of 1699 and 1707, in addition to his commentary on Pufendorf's book, begin with references to it and its relevance to rational and consequently moral human conduct and relationships with others and with God. In this sense, Carmichael's ideas align with trends that will characterize moral and natural law theories in the years following his death in 1729. This conception, stemming from Aristotelian Thomistic scholastic philosophies, will also be prevalent within the speculation of the Scottish Enlightenment, indeed. However, the importance of this idea for the Scottish philosophical culture was not entirely new, as the relationship between human happiness and the veneration of God was already central to the ideas of some authors still tied to the doctrine of revelation, such as Henry Skougal. Skougal's work, The Life of God and the Soul of Man, illustrates the connection between human happiness and revealed law. Carmichael, in reference to this specific point, underscores that both rationality and the law of nature entails happiness, the main end of human action, and adherence to God's will. Rationality, happiness, and natural law are also connected with soul's immortality, a conception that is again based on Carmichael's criticism of Pufendorf. Unlike Carmichael's normative framework, the German lawyer distinguishes between natural law and moral theology, emphasizing their different purposes. Pufendorf suggests that natural law, the focus of natural jurisprudence, pertains to worldly affairs only. Carmichael, on the other hand, disagrees with this notion and aims to elevate natural jurisprudence beyond mere earthly concerns from the human forum, which Pufendorf had relegated to it. This is a quite interesting point because also Leibniz appointed the same criticism to Pufendorf. Carmichael's argument is grounded in reason, happiness, virtue, and the law of nature, his argument for the soul's immortality, I mean. He posits that since happiness and misery are not always confined to this life, one can deduce the existence of a future state of the soul, suggesting that there must be conditions allowing human nature, happiness, virtue, and morality to flourish. Thus, Carmichael contends that the scope of natural law extends beyond earthly existence. Happiness and misery, he writes, are not always dispensed in this life on these terms. He can quite clearly infer from this very fact that some future state of the soul is to be expected. So it is like a postulate. It is not correct, therefore, to say that the end of the discipline of natural law is confined to the scope merely of this life. This perspective resonates with the later Kantian postulate of practical reason. In the first critique, Kant argues that we need to postulate afterlife to seek the happiness, to seek the happiness, or we can't fulfill in the temporal world, while in the second critique, immortality is a postulate to permit endless progress towards virtue, morality, and happiness. The Scottish Enlightenment, the thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment will find merit in Carmichael's argument. And David Fordyce, recognized as one of Kant's sources in a very interesting work by Federica Basaglia, was saying that David Fordyce, recognized as one of Kant's sources, will adopt this viewpoint. So Kant reads the Scottish thinkers. I'm not sure he read Carmichael. I don't think so. But what I mean to illustrate is that this kind of postulate was very common in the Scottish Enlightenment, and its origin for the Scottish philosophical culture appears to be originated in Carmichael's writing. The points illustrated thus far leads to the explanation of deontology and of the normativity of nature, which is a significant yet often overlooked aspect of early modern political philosophy, as noted by Hannah Dawson. Carmichael's utilization of the concept of officium, duty, appears to draw parallels with the Stoic original concept of katekon, which carries both normative and deontological implication, as observed by Jack Wisnik in his The Invention of Duty. Katekon seems to extend beyond mere appropriate action to encompass a normative dimension. Indeed, according to Wisnik, instead of simply representing appropriate action, the Stoic concept of katekon, translated as officium by Cicero, actually embodied a well-developed understanding of duty, which closely parallels our modern conception more than previously acknowledged. In Carmichael's philosophy, the normativity of nature and the deontological significance of duties, officia, are central to his entire system, highlighting the interconnectedness of nature, reason, virtue, and adherence to God's will. Carmichael, it seems to me, underscores a perfect alignment between natural law and divine law, positive moral conduct as both rational and in harmony with divine will and nature. The duties, officia, by which nature itself teaches that indirectly and mediately we are to give evidence of a due sentiment of love and veneration for the Supreme Being, are appropriately reduced to one general law and may be deduced from it. This law is that we should promote to the best of our ability the perfection of all creatures, but especially the happiness of rational creatures, in which the perfection of the rest is contained, so far as this does not conflict, to the best of our knowledge, with manifestation of the divine glory. It's noteworthy that Carmichael's reliance on a Stoic framework is evident even on other level, with Cicero's On Duty serving as a primary source that he frequently consulted, and that preserves fragments of Panetius' work on duties, Katekonta. Scholars such as Brodie and Maurer have highlighted Carmichael's deep engagement with Stoic philosophy by highlighting his use of Epictetus' practical formulas and Seneca's conception of wrath, for example. This influence offers valuable insights into Carmichael's normative conception of officia, deeply rooted in nature, reason, virtue, happiness, and adherence to God's will. Such duties are threefold and owed to God, oneself, and others, similarly to those of the Stoics. So, what does Carmichael's use of officium underscore? This image shows the affinity between Carmichael's conception of officium and the Stoic notion of katekon. it seems to me that there is a strong interconnection between nature, reason, virtue, happiness, God's will, and the officium, which is duty. As God's wills indeed commands to promote happiness for the rational creatures. Officium, according to Carmichael, is something that entails living according to nature, that entails living according to reason, that entails living according to virtue and equates virtue with happiness. Officia are owed to God, other human beings, and oneself. These 5 points perfectly fit with the concept of kathekon, as framed during the Stoic era, so as theorized by Stoic philosophers. Firmly interconnected with the dimension of duties is that of rights. Carmichael, in his theorization of rights, begins by distinguishing between natural rights, iura naturalia, and adventitious rights, iura adventitia, basing this distinction on the foundations on which they rest, nature or society. Among the former, which will be the only ones discussed in this presentation, are included the right of life, ius vitae, the right of physical integrity, ius integritatis membrorum, the right of chastity, ius pudicitiae, and the right of simple reputation, ius simplicis extimationis. To this group, Carmichael adds a 5th element essential for the entirety of his political philosophy, namely liberty, or libertas, Latin. Liberty is defined on one hand as the power of ordering one's actions as one pleases, but always within the limits of divine law, and on the other hand as the ability to make use of things that are positively common in nature. The natural rights, moreover, are sanctioned, together with the duties they correspond to, by the universal precept of natural law, by which every man is forbidden from violating any of these rights in another. This precept, being perfectly aligned with the divine law, is also founded on the fact that when God prescribes something to man, he is simply signifying that he requires us to do such and such an action, interpreting this as a sign of love and veneration toward him. Conversely, if such actions were not performed or acted against the precept in question, all of this will be interpreted by God as an indication of contempt or hatred. Regarding equality, Carmichael starts from similar observations to those made by Pufendorf and other contemporaries by tirelessly emphasizing the relevance of natural equality. Linking it to personal freedom, Carmichael is able to lead his critique of slavery, for example, to much more consistent and categorical consequences. In fact, despite Pufendorf also shared the importance of human equality, he ultimately defended the practice of slavery on the grounds of utility, paradoxically basing such defense on the same anthropological assumptions of Aristotle. I say paradoxically because Pufendorf derives from Christian theology the equality of all men, of all rational creatures. According to the anthropological assumption of Aristotle, which is shared by Pufendorf, there will be by nature human beings inclined to the condition of slavery. A fully appropriate social position that leads Pufendorf's positions, along with those of Grotius and Hobbes, to pro-slavery views, as defined by Davis in his famous The Problem of Slavery in Western Culture. On the contrary, Carmichael's emphasis on equality and on the right of liberty is stronger than often acknowledged. Slavery violated the same Carmichaelian idea of the primacy of natural and divine law over temporal laws. In nothing, Carmichael writes, have the nations so strayed from the law of sociability than in their assessment of the right of war with regard to the introduction of slavery. It makes one wonder that the human race should so forget its worth and willingly conspire to bring upon itself endless outrages, indignities, abuses, and afflictions. Not only is the specific theme of this point distant from the deductions of Pufendorf, Hobbes, and even Barbeyrac, but surprisingly also from those of Locke, despite the second treatise being one of Carmichael's most used and appreciated sources. I believe it is interesting to note how the criticism of slavery delineated among Carmichael's works on this aspect is worthy of further comparison. This view, moreover, as stated by Moore and Silverton, would have been stronger in its opposition to slavery compared to what was theorized by Locke. Carmichael would have insisted on this denunciation more unequivocally than Locke has ever done. It is known that Locke's position against slavery is fundamentally rooted in the very heart of the right of property that every individual has over their own body. Although every man has a property in his own person, he, not having the power over his own life, cannot even choose to submit to the despotism of others, and therefore cannot, neither by contract nor by his own consent, enslave himself to anyone. Keeping these brief observations in mind, it will now be possible to illustrate the theoretical contaminations and differences between what is presented in Carmichael's supplements and what is instead claimed by Locke. Carmichael himself frequently refers to the reader to the pages of the second treatise on this point, but there is an important difference between the two authors to consider, especially because subsequent Scottish philosophers will have the opportunity to engage with Locke's political thought, also mediated by the supplements written by Carmichael. Firstly, the emphasis is placed by Carmichael on that natural right, which is personal freedom, inalienable, and by virtue of natural equality inherent to every human being. On the contrary, considering Locke's position regarding the condition of those who, in the case of a just war, will be reduced to a state of slavery, a contrast emerges, because Locke says that the absolute dominion and the arbitrary power of slaves' master is accepted if those slaves are indeed taken in war. Even in the specific case of slavery in a war context, to which many of the observations already outlined were directed, Carmichael seems much more consistent in holding natural equality and personal freedom together. In his description of the institution of slavery, indeed, the despotism of the master is not contemplated. In such conditions, even those who wage just wars must be set limits on their demands. Although for Locke, natural rights includes freedom, property, and right to life, in this case, there seems to be a clear preeminence of the second aspect above all others, even though, as is known, Locke subsumes the three concepts under the generic concept of property. Moreover, in critical terms, this position has often been noted as peculiar and inconsistent, which, on the other hand, did not stop the author of the second treatise from being a shareholder of the Royal African Company. Carmichael, even in the event of the transfer of a personal right, which also concerns the acquisition of a service by third parties, observes that what will be transferred is simply a certain particle of a man's natural liberty, not liberty in its entirety. Moreover, the same right, once reconfirmed to the original subject, holder of it, loses its character as a personal right and recovers the name of natural liberty. As noted by Guenther, Thomas Paine makes use of cryptic references to Carmichael within his pamphlet denouncing slavery. Here's once again the political theological framework through which Carmichael expresses his criticism of slavery, reinforces his reliance on a strong defense of natural rights stemming from equality, freedom, and sociability. elements sealed by God's will and nature itself. The feature of sociability as a law of nature.
We should head towards a wrap up. We're running out of time for the presentation.
Yes, there's just a few more words.
Okay.
One page left. Just a second. The feature of sociability as a law of nature, thus defended and linked to natural equality, is the philosophical basis that Carmichael adopts in order to contrast Hobbes and Pufendorf's conception of human nature. Reason is not mere calculation, as Hobbes stated, and sociability as the third law of nature, an inherent feature of human nature, contrasts Pufendorf's conception of it, a mere consequence of self-love and weakness. So human nature, along with human reason, is normative according to Carmichael and respond to the will of God, which established through the third law of nature that humans are social by nature. Thus, conceiving of a selfish and isolated human being is a pure abstraction. Human nature is inherently political. This is the last point. The right of resistance as a consequence of second and third laws of nature from self-respect and sociability, which is also significant for natural equality and for the condemnation of slavery. But since, as we have seen, duties and rights are intertwined and respecting duties is respecting God, we see that this conception includes, in my view, the fact that Gershom Carmichael also states that the right of resistance derives from obedience and adherence to God's will, and so to the first law of nature. This is why I choose to frame Carmichael's philosophy and theory of natural law through the lens of political theology, which I think offers a fruitful perspective. His continual references to God's ubiquity and the interconnectedness between the empirical and transcendent realms suggest a blending of theological and political concepts. Viewing his work under this light illuminates the ways in which divine principles inform his understanding of natural law, political organization, and the normativity of nature. Additionally, Carmichael's philosophy resonates with occasionalism, further confirming a strong theological perspective even on the metaphysical and naturalistic aspects of causation. Okay. Click here. Oh. Okay, here we are.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Francesco. And
thank you for listening.
And thanks everyone for keeping it tight in their microphone use. We've had a couple disturbances, but it was overall great. All right, so I am going to stop the recording now.